Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual seminar organized by the International Society for the Study of Early Medieval England. We're organizing these virtual seminars to showcase all of the exciting research that is going on within our field, ranging from textual editing to medievalism to historical linguistics to archaeology. And over the last 2 years, we've been using these seminars to collaborate with exciting societies and projects within our field. And today we're very honored and excited to be working together with a project called Old English Poetry in Facsimile, a project that has recently been approved as a Medieval Academy of America Medieval Digital Resource. Hooray! Which means that it's been peer-reviewed and formally recommended by members of the Speculum Review Board and the Medieval Academy of America's Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee. And we also recommend it, although not officially. Here to talk about this exciting project is its mastermind and its director, Martin Foys, who is the Nancy C. Hoofs Professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He will first sort of guide us through this project and its website, and then give a paper on the benefits of restorative retention in the editing of Old English poetry. Martin, the digital floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's so amazing to see so many familiar names. It's been too long since I've hung out with almost all of you, so that's fantastic. And huge thanks to Thijs and all of ISSEME for inviting me to talk here. I'm super excited. I'm sure I have way more than an hour of stuff to talk about. I'm just going to kind of get going and roll through as much as I can, and we'll see where we get from there. So just to kind of get the basic stuff out of the way, what is Old English Poetry and Facsimile project? It's a 10-year project that we are about 7 or 8 years into now. The goal is to re-edit all of surviving and known Old English examples of Old English poetry to now available digital facsimiles. Where have we gotten so far? We've published 313 to date new editions of these texts, that counting for almost 24,000 lines, or about 76% of the poetic corpus in Old English. If you throw in Beowulf, which we're probably not going to do because Kevin Kiernan's already done it in a really amazing way and is rolling out, word has it, a new edition of it soon, of Electronic Beowulf, plus Cadman's Hem that Dan O'Donnell has done storied work on, kind of bringing together all the witnesses to facsimile as well. That, if you put all that together, that's now 86, almost 87% of the poetic corpus available in digital facsimile and re-edited online. So we're about 85% of the way done with our work. As you can see, there's a lot of works that have been already edited. So many riddles and even more psalms. We're just closing in on the end of both of the psalms and the riddles, which are quite exciting, up to Psalm 141 and Exeter Riddle 87 to date. Right now, we're just wrapping up final work on Old English, on the Solomon and Saturn dialogues. So you can be looking for that relatively soon. So, okay, let me kind of give you the kind of basic overview here. So basically, I've already explained the easy surface goal of this, right? We now have the ability to take digital editions of Old English poetry and unite them more immediately to digital facsimile images. And so here's a kind of quick and easy example of this, part of the Genesis B text. We can scroll right down here. So as you can see here, both a transcription edition and a facsimile edition. What is unique about this is we're working within a platform called Digital Mappa that was also designed by me and a series of people over the past 10 years that allow you to basically bring together curated collections of images, digital images and digital texts, and then edit them in symmetrical sort of ways. So for example, if we zoom in here, we've got the opening word of page 18 here, brand, and we see it over here. They're both highlighted in the exact same ways. If you click on that B, you see that these editions are symmetrically edited as well. So you can kind of come into this text and gain and access the same material either through the textual transcription edition or the digital facsimile image edition, and the same material is being accessed in both ways. So this allows for a kind of symmetrical linkage. Also, another affordance of the digital map platform is it allows you to produce multiple links to the same moment that you're target that you're linking to. So for here, for instance, we have Waran, which has been corrected from Waro. You see we've got a quick link to a series of things here over on the image side. We've got the link directly to the word in question. And if we did not have this open and we just clicked on this, it would take you right to it. And then also a link to the N that's been added above, and then also a link then to a note about this correction, right? So, and then same thing here. If you go here, you've got the same exact kind of symmetrical setup to links to the material on the transcription edition, and again the note. Okay. Also, in a fun sort of way that is super useful, you have the ability to open up multiple instances of the same document. You know, this is particularly useful for large poems that you want to be able to compare different parts to, or if you just simply want to look at different moments on the same image at the same time, you have that ability as well. You have the ability to curate your display, move everything around. There's a series of different kinds of layouts you can do as well there. I'm already logged in, so I can also show you very quickly how easy it is to edit in this project. This is very important because I have a large cohort, some of who are here today, a large cohort of contributing editors who I collaborate with, and the ability to train them to do this kind of work quickly to produce rather sophisticated amounts of and complex amounts of annotated and linked data without having to know anything technologically under the hood is pretty important as well. So the way this works is, I'm just going to move this over here so I can access it easier. You can check out a document if you are an editor, and then it becomes as easy as just selecting a word or selecting a bit of text, choosing how you want to make that an active highlight. So there I've just made that word an active highlight. And then once you have that going on, you can link it to all sorts of things. So we'll check out the image here as well and do the same thing. I can make the same exact kind of active highlight on the word. There it is, Sotan, right? And so there we go. And then I can do all sorts of things to it. I can link it together. Just there. Now we've got that link there. I can change these names if I want, as we do. So we kind of have quick editorial information even in the highlight title there. And then and that's about as easy as it gets. You want to make a note for it. You click on this add annotation note, and then a note comes up and gets automatically linked. So there we go. There's our note that we're going to write. And then if I want to link that also over here to the image side of things, I can bring that over there, and then we see that we've got both the note linked in both things. All right, so I'm gonna real quick delete all this stuff so it doesn't just end up in the actual edition. Again, showing you how easy it is to relatively easy as it is to kind of edit all of this material in these ways. And finally, boom, and good. Okay, and this is important. The kind of WYSIWYG, the kind of what you see is what you get editing, where you don't need to know anything except how to kind of click, highlight, type, and draw shapes on a page using the toolbar. That's all you need to know to begin to produce this kind of work, and that's very important because. As I mentioned, I have a whole host of editors that have trained and worked with me in editing these poems. And every summer we run a Old English practicum for learning how to digitally edit. So we have had people from not simply UW-Madison, but Rutgers and Stanford and Cornell. And so if you know of anybody who is interested in learning how to do this kind of editorial work. Each summer we work and I run a practicum, and I can take on 2 or 3 or 4 new contributing editors to learn how to do this. So that's been very generative. I tried to work very hard to mentor people while we're doing this. So it's not simply like do this work for me, but there's always ongoing training. And I think most editors will attest they've learned an awful lot about the complexities of Old English poetry as they work on this. Okay, moving on. So as we see here, we've really got 2 editions that are kind of talking to each other here. You got the transcription edition. By design, this edition is a replication of the standard and highly formatted form of Old English poetry that we're used to seeing and using. You've got your visual syntax of the standard Caesar and half lines and all that sort of stuff. And then on the other side, you have the facsimile edition, the material moments for this. And this is important. Let's see if my thing is going to work here. Oh, good, it is. All right. So this is important, of course, because the transcription edition simply cannot produce the same amount of information that is on the manuscript page. In this kind of example here, we see how complex the actual facsimile image is. All this kind of host of information, not simply the Old English text. We've got runes, those can be kind of described and things. We've got printer's marks from things like George Hicks, who is kind of marking this up for his 1703 publication. We've got rubbing left by gold leaf on the material image as well. We've got pencil marks left by Hicks, and we've got all sorts of versions of punctuation and all these sorts of things, many of which do not normally find their way into the typical printed edition, or transcribed edition. So we have the ability for all of that to be working as well. Okay, I'm going to see if this stuff is now working for me here. Right, so good, we're back on track here. So the other kind of thing is while this is mostly manuscripts, there are of course objects that we have edited in the project as well. And so here we've got the Frank's casket. I've included this detail for a cool reason, because as most of us probably know, part of the Frank's casket's not in the British Museum. It's actually over in Florence at the Bargello Museum. And so I've been able to kind of procure an image of that and digitally re-edit this together so you have the actual image and not the reconstruction in there. Where are we going next? Right, we have a lot of kind of cool collaborations that are happening here. One of the things we've been able to do is work with Kevin Kiernan from the old Electronic Boethius project, and he has been very generous in making the UV images of Cottonmouth OA6 available for our edition. We have the ability to kind of produce layers here, so we can jump off and look at the same text in both Old English, in both UV and the normal. That can be incredibly useful. This also gives us the ability when we're digitally editing to recreate text, right? So Susan Irvine, about 15 years ago, showed that this actual part of this fragment here has been inappropriately reconstructed or inaccurately reconstructed to the wrong page. And so we've been able to put it back on the right page. And again, the UV construction here really kind of helps you clarify and see all that language. And then we've got that all tagged down here to where the restored fragment has been misplaced. We also, of course, have Junius's original transcriptions from Junius 12 as well here to be able to kind of compare that stuff. So that's one really great example of collaboration. We've also been working with the Visionary Cross project in editing the Ruthell Cross, which we just finished this summer, and they were able to provide their 3D scans for the image of the 17-foot Ruthell Cross. So now, of course, it would be great to have a full photographic facsimile of it, but that is not yet been really produced in a way that is kind of workable and edible. And so we're very grateful to the Visionary Cross Project, who has provided their 3D transcriptions of the image, and then we've been able to kind of produce an entire digital edition off of that. I should point out that you can also turn off all the highlights if you wish to kind of declutter and just look at the actual primary source of the image itself, or the transcription of the text itself. Okay. And of course, I am extremely grateful to all the digital repositories who have made their digital images of facsimiles and manuscripts available. This work cannot happen without all of that. So the goal here is to, like the ASPR before it, to make everything available, not simply the major canonical works, but everything we got. And so what's kind of cool about that is this also makes more accessible less well-known works. And so we've got a whole section on microverses, the sort of what are often dismissed, have been historically dismissed as things like scribbles. This is my favorite one here. We've got in Harley 208 at the bottom what very much looks like to be the beginning of a lost epic poem, What ich erfähre de Sache. And it's great. It's very, it was kind of, Carr calls it a scribble. And so we were like, well, why not call it an epic scribble to kind of center the idea that this is the beginning of something that was perhaps much, much larger. On the same token, we have, we have other less well-known poems. For instance, this one just discovered back in the 80s, buried within a boundary clause of a Textus Rafensis charter, which is absolutely fascinating. It is both produced in as Latin poetry and then also as Old English poetry. So we had the ability to edit that, but then also using the resources that we have here in the Old English in the Digital Mappa environment editing platform, we were able to put in the actual kind of map of like the boundary that is being described here in the city of Rochester in England, and then also even kind of putting in the Google shot of the actual place as it survives today. So there's all these kinds of affordances here that we are able to do. So as I kind of like to say, this project is designed to meet the surviving material version of this poem in its own moment. To not privilege, therefore, the fixing or the regularization of the text, but rather to embrace the potential, its potential heterogeneity. And I'll be talking more about that in the second part of the talk, kind of coming up very, very quickly here. But to speak very briefly, we try to practice what I am calling restorative retention here, which is we are not, we are only going to edit and amend the text as a kind of last resort. If we can find a way that what is written on the page, which has been historically or traditionally amended, is actually revelatory or revealing of dialectic or metrical heterogeneity and diversity, or structural diversity, or sometimes simply scribal choices that may depart from the source, but are still construable and functional as poetry or as language. We're going to keep that, right? So I'll get a bit into that more in the second part of the talk. Also, just point out some cool things that you're able to do here as you're linking across. Of course, Dream of the Root, as most of us know, shares text with the Brussels Reliquary and the Rothel Cross, and so you have the ability to therefore kind of link through to from one text to all these other ones. So here, for instance, you can take right from the moment of Ich Richne König, which we see happening both in Rothel and Brussels as well. And you can then indeed just kind of click off, go to those guys, and open up those editions as well if you desire, and get right to the meat of the material. So here is the Ich Richne König on the Brussels Reliquary, for instance. So a couple of other points before we move on to the second part of this talk, less of the project report and more of a kind of digging down into it. One of the things that ways in this resource has been designed is to kind of privilege accessibility of materials. Now I have a kind of big caveat here in that when we talk about accessibility, the next major development cycle for this project is to get the technology into compliance with universal design accessibility as well. I'm sort of well aware that this is not as accessible as it needs to be for everybody, but now that we have all the core functionality of the project in place, I'm able to kind of finally begin to turn to raising the funds to produce a version of this that will conform to university design features and accessibilities as well. So I'm going to put that over there for now. But talking about accessibility as well, this is a project that is designed for beginning students of Old English all the way up to senior scholars to be able to use. One thing I learned as I do a lot of editing and of these projects is how much, historically speaking, gatekeeping has operated in this kind of editorial work. One of the phrases that I write the most and that we write the most when we're doing notes is that something has been amended, quote unquote, without comment. Like, it's just obvious why you would need to change X into Y in this text. And that's you know, that kind of closes off a lot of knowledge to people. Like, people don't necessarily know immediately why something has been amended. Like, why, for instance, does wildness in the opening lines of the Dream of the Rood, why does it need to often be amended to well-dendus? Or does it even need to be amended to well-dendus? And so our notes always do the work of kind of trying to explain the reasons behind emendations as they have happened historically in the past, and then why we are choosing to amend, or is more often the case, not amend the text, as it were. So here we kind of have a kind of metrical argument for why wildness has been frequently amended to well-dendus, from forest to ruler. It works and it's functional as written. There's a kind of decent argument for why this might be representative of archaically uncontracted or disyllabic meter here, with wildness, that diphthong perhaps playing the role of a disyllabic word. You know, and what's interesting about this is the way patterns emerge as I do this work. I have come across numerous examples now of 3-syllable half lines that contain a diphthong. And so, you know, an easy argument can be made that there's a sort of marginal kind of metricality that's happening here that perhaps doesn't need to be amended. And so we'll get a little bit more into that in the next part of this. Also, and this is kind of the big new thing that we have. Oh, wait, before that, I'm getting ahead of myself. Also, we like to note that we like to build what is called the editorial archaeology of these moments that are amended or not amended in the editions. You know, if we choose not to amend, or even if we do choose to amend, we kind of want to produce that genealogy of the major editions before us who have come and the decisions they have made, and if we can figure it out why they have made them as well. Again, a lot of times we have kind of the without comment problem to work around, and so we do a lot of conjectural work to be like, we think Krapp and Clayton and Dickens and Ross amended this for the following reasons, even if they didn't say so. So that's always kind of fun to unpack as well. All right. One of the big new things that we have that's like super exciting for us is just released this past month is the ability now in digital Mappa platforms to create specific and granular citationality. So for instance, if I think, hang on a sec, let me find where the chat is here. Here it is. So I'm putting a link right here. If you take that link and you just open it up, it will take you right now to these 4 documents. So users now have the ability to arrange a set of documents on a page and then create a link that will produce that exact display. This is kind of a game changer for me. It's something I've wanted for years, and we finally got to the point where we had both the funds and we were in the place to develop that functionality. And so it's super exciting because what it allows you to now do is embed specific moments of these 313 editions elsewhere, right? So if you're using it in a classroom, if you're publishing something in a scholarly essay, digital publication, you will now be able to kind of put that that moment in the in your own scholarship. And so, yeah, we're super excited for the ability to have that as well. And then finally, the last point of this kind of overview of the edition and project is the other thing that's been very much on my mind is sustainability. You know, like this is 10 years of my life. There's so much more information that's been brought together and pulled together, but I'm also, of course, very aware of technological obsolescence. What happens in 10, 20, 50 years when this technology is no longer operative? So the other great thing about that we've just been able to institute in digital MAPA platforms is we now have the ability to export and archive, you know, all of the data that is in such a project. What does that look like for something like digital MAPA, or sorry, for Old English Poetry and Facsimile? Well, we now have the ability to export it out as all of the content as simply a set of HTML and image files that are basically as kind of bare bones functional in terms of online technology as necessary. And so it replicates the material and the structure of all of the editions, including links then to all of the specific images as well, that will allow you to, you know, 50 or 100 years from now, still get to all of the material that we've been working and publishing. So we're very happy about that as well. I should point out that if you are interested in learning how to make your own kind of links in this material, you can simply go to the Quick Start page. I believe Patricia Daly was just asking about that in the talk, but you can go here and you get exact instructions for how to make the links that you have. All right. So that is the first part of my talk, just about the time. I was planning to do it for a half hour. Sort of the benefits of restorative retention and what it affords, this approach that I'm going to talk about in more detail now over the next 20 or 25 minutes. So the modern edition, you know, the printed edition that we typically encounter, you know, has kind of become de facto the text of this poetry, of Old English poetry, you know, but the modern edition renders the actual surviving medieval and material versions of this text into what I actually like to kind of call an untext, right? The medieval material source of the modern edition isn't really the text that most readers study when they study what they think is a work of medieval literature, right? They're going to be looking at something more like this than they are going to be looking at something that looks more like this. But the modern printed and edited text is, you know, if it is how we largely encounter this, what then happens is the untext, what I'm calling the untext, what is kind of produced alongside of the notion of this printed text that we take as a kind of modern access point to the medieval material. The untext that is produced alongside it derives from the modern editorial desire for a better idealized and ideated text that underlies the surviving material form. The ideological desire to believe in the decay of the source through copy and a stubbornly enduring mistrust of the scribes who are actually responsible for, in effect, producing and fashioning the surviving poems we have, you know, kind of all factor into this. So for centuries, these texts and untexts of medieval literature have also then been conditioned by the logic of print culture. Right? With the advent of digital textual environments, the nature of the modern editorial text and the medieval texted fashion is necessarily changing. This is the whole point of this project. All this to say, of course, that the digital doesn't do away with the medieval untext, but it does provide opportunities to refashion it in powerful ways, significantly by allowing readers to access to dynamic facsimiles of original material forms of the medieval texts and producing editions directly upon such facsimiles, as we've been seeing, and bridging in active ways the older and familiar formal traditions of the typographic transcription edition, as we see over here, and what can be new models for emergent digital facsimile editions. Now, as I've already mentioned, this is in some ways simply another textual mediation and intervention into the medieval material, right? Specifically, the ways in which this kind of continues to replicate the very artificial reformatting of Old English poetry in the modern conventions. So I'm well aware of that. I always kind of have to make a big statement about this, otherwise I get a question about it afterwards. And also it's important to point out that any edition cannot capture all or even most aspects of the material textual objects it is seeking to edit. All editions have to make specific choices about what they want to focus on and what they want to privilege, right? So the Old English Poetry and Facsimile Project, is hyper-focused therefore on what is the surviving version of the text that we have, and how much do we need and can we preserve of it and still preserve it as a sensible and construable statement, right? So that's what we're focused on. So as I said before, kind of following in the footsteps of the Anglo-Saxon poetic records, the Old English Poetry and Facsimile Project is not simply seeking to be comprehensive, it's also seeking to be highly conservative in its editorial approaches. If you will, amending as a last resort only. We kind of already saw a great example of that with this idea of Wildis at the beginning of the Dream of the Rood. Often amend it, but does not necessarily need to be amended, right? And why are we doing this? Because Old English poetry is a dynamic discourse which has changed radically over the 4 centuries of its surviving corpus. And so it's important to not read this corpus of Old English poetry diachronically as a narrative of kind of classical decay over time, as 19th century scholars and some 20th century scholars would often read this as there was this time of classical meter, the better time of Old English poetry, and then as it moves forward, it decays and falls apart. And I saw Ian Cornelius in the audience here today, and that kind of work, kind of pushing back against the kind of very prescriptive circular methodologies of metricality are in a number of ways a huge inspiration for the kind of way in which we're doing our work here as well. The work of Ian and Eric Weiscott and numerous others, Tom Bredehoff, are huge for us here. So the decision to amend a surviving material text for modern access, the decisions to do this are manifold, right? There's good reasons to do it in a number of different ways. The character of any particular modern edition is defined in turn by the amount of investment and or anxiety the editors have across a range of concerns: scribal skill, a relation to known sources and analogs, dialectical variation, adherence to modern theories of so-called classical meter, as I just mentioned, and or perceptions of grammatical, morphological, phonological, or semantic infelicities or awkwardness. Such concerns and how much an edition acts upon them ultimately arise from interrelated levels of editorial skepticism towards the surviving material text, i.e. what I like to call the emergent untext. The idealized belief in or the desire for a preceding text underlying a material substrate. That is to say, this idea that underneath here we have a previous text. But that text isn't necessarily imagined now. It's not like it doesn't actually exist or survive, right? But we kind of have this desire, or have in the past this editorial desire, this imagined accessibility to produce for modern readers. That we have a text here that is kind of a decayed copy of a telos of an idealized text, right? So the higher the levels of this anxiety are, the more change an edition will affect in its reproduction. And so, for example, my favorite example for this is the Journey Charm from Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, 41, right? For example, the late Old English literally marginal Journey Charm found in 41 presents numerous orthographic, grammatical, and metrical concerns, prompting one early 20th century editor, Ferdinand Holthausen, to amend the text 66 times in 42 lines. Let me get the transcription edition up here as well here for you. That's kind of amazing, right? 66 times in 42 lines. This text is then amended 17 times in Dobby's relatively, for the time, conservative ASPR edition. And then in our OEPF edition, even more conservatively, we amend only 10 times. Similarly, to kind of take a random selection of, oh, no, I'm not going to do this. For time, I'm going to cut this. But we can kind of think about things like Pope and Fulk's 8 Old English poems, right? They will amend sometimes 30 or 40 times in 20 or 30 lines. This is because it's a classroom edition. It's standardizing and regularizing the language. So it's another great example of, all editions are going to kind of come in and intervene in the text at different levels in different ways. But now Holthausen and Pope Folk intensively intervened for markedly different reasons. Holthausen viewed the Journey Charm as linguistically and metrically degraded, while Pope and Folk are producing classroom texts with standardized orthography and eases of learning, though they often also would amend for what they considered to be deficient, quote unquote, meter. But at times, the power of emendation can have far-reaching effects. Let me see, do I have this slide here now? Oh, good, I do. Right, so as E.G. Stanley has argued, the very title of the Exeter book poem, now called The Order of the World, likely derives from an unnecessarily emended line in the poem. And we can kind of take a look at this right here. So you've got Ye Munda being written here in around line 46, right? This is often amended to Ye Kunda because you shouldn't have a double alliterative stress in the B line of a Old English poem, but yet you do. And so, maybe that's not a mistake. Maybe that's just an exception, right? But what I kind of love about this is the idea that we have changed mind to order may have been the very reason that when Krapp and Dobby came along, they decided, who did amend, they decided to name this poem The Order of the World when it used to be called The Wonder of Creation. So these things can kind of have some far-reaching effects. So taking up the charge of Fred Robinson made nearly 45 years ago now that manuscripts matter, restorative retention values the validity of an existing surviving textual moment over what editors have traditionally termed its authority. Douglas Moffat has shown how loaded the notion of authority is when it comes to editing Old English, laden as it is with associations of not just an actual author, but also a mistrust of vernacular scribes and a Latinate hierarchical desire for a precedent and idealized text to leverage against the existing one. If authority looks at a text and judges whether it works as it should, validity meets the text in its own moment, asking only, what does this text work as it is, or sometimes, can it work as perhaps it has now become? There is so much to learn and know about Old English simply by asking how a text does work, as opposed to deciding how it doesn't work with overly prescriptive modes of meter, grammar, phonetics, orthography, morphology, or even sense. Right? So in doing so, these Old English poetry and facsimile editions privilege linguistic heterogeneity and description over standardization, conjectural reconstruction, and grammatical and metrical prescription, and as a result highlight the phonological, orthographical, grammatical, metrical, and lexical diversity within the Old English language. And in some cases, moments that simply needed to be considered even more carefully within the larger semantic, structural, or thematic concepts of the poetic text. The Old English poetic corpus is not a monolith. It is a corpus full of diversity and difference, as variable as its scribes, who often change these texts over time for all sorts of reasons, and medieval heterogeneity should not be edited away as if it were not good enough to stand because of modern expectations. In practice, OEPF editions actually retain between 50 and 75% of textual readings that were amended in one or more major editions from the ASPR forward. Okay, so I'm going to kind of close out in the last 10 minutes, just giving you some very quick examples of the ways in which we've retained work in our OEPF editions. I already showed the Dream of the Rude, the Way Aldous that we did for meter here. I also just think it's kind of amazing when you look at this stuff to think about how it works when you are actually kind of faced with just the specific manuscript image showing you the text right there. It feels harder to kind of change it when you've got that, just looking at that right there. Okay, so we did that. I'm going to give you another quick example of meter. Here's another great example of this. Junis 11 is just shot through with single half lines, right? And so many editors have kind of come to this and then been like, well, there's probably something missing, or maybe there's something missing. Why, single half lines are not typical. But, as has been shown for years, starting with Alan Bliss, single half lines are all over the Old English corpus, and in some texts more frequently than others. And you can end up with moments of these texts that are not necessarily lacking any kind of meaning whatsoever, right? So, for instance, if we go here and take a look at this single half line, Tha he forth yewat, it's got what Bliss has called continuing alliteration past the previous half line on F's, right? It may have been deliberately kind of put in coming right before this illustration here as a kind of a moment of punctuation, like the breaking of the standard metrical patterns kind of calls attention to it, right? And so why not take this opportunity not to just say, well, maybe something's missing in the standard formatting, but reformat it as a triplet. So we kind of are formatting triplets all over the place here for metrical reasons. Other examples, I'm going to kind of show the search function here real quick. Other examples here we can kind of look at are just things that have been changed because of scribal choice, right? So here in Exeter Riddle 85, we've got a word irnin. There it is, irnin. Nothing wrong with it. Works kind of perfectly, but has been often amended to rinan, so it'll alliterate more clearly. But you've got a vocalic entrance there. The scribe clearly made that choice. Though rinan more strictly aligns with the alliterative pattern, this is purely functional. There's no question of meaning. There's enough rhotic quality happening in there, as the note sort of says. Why do we have to kind of amend and change that? And another great example here, speaking grammatically, Old English, especially Old English, is shot through with all sorts of orthographic and phonetic evolution and change, right? So we encounter the notions of the inflections being reduced or leveled constantly, and so many times this will be amended, this diversity or variance will be amended out for regularity and ease of use, right? And so if we kind of think about this, we've got this example minra here, which should be genitive plural according to the grammar, and so it's often amended to what you would expect, the expected minra with an A. But you know what? Like, the more you do this, the more patterns emerge. And so, there are so many examples of this, where you've got what should be a genitive plural EA or A at the end, and instead it's got an E. And so often it gets amended, but you know what? Like, it's a record of how the language is shifting or changing or being treated differently by different scribes or heard differently, and so we want to keep all of that in there as much as possible. I think I've been thinking a lot about this with the late Old English interchange and mixture between a-thorn and e-thorn for the plurals and singulars. Happens so much in Northern dialects and still survives arguably into later texts. Again, get standardized, get amended out, but we're kind of keeping that stuff in there as well. Just a few more examples here as we kind of wrap up. Another kind of great example here is capitalization, right? So the standard modern transcription edition, which this the OEPF version to a large degree follows, puts in all sorts of stuff that's not in the original, right? Periods and punctuation, line breaks, all these sorts of things. But one of the things it also does is it puts in capitals, right? But then one of the things we learned while we were editing here is that oftentimes the ASPR forward kind of desire for like hypotactic as opposed to paratactic structures that are more privileged in the Old English text ends up taking out a lot of capitals as well and replacing them with semicolons, right? So, you might have here, for example, a set of small capitals that are in previous editions just simply elided from the record and turned into lowercase. So again, these capitals are there not simply to say this is the beginning of a sentence, but sometimes they're there for emphasis. Sometimes clauses get capitals in them. And so we kind of want to keep those in the material and editorial record as well and not elide them out. We can also then think structurally here about how the digital affordances of these kinds of editions allow us to not simply edit these texts as we now want them to be, but as they actually were. And my favorite example of this is from Exeter, the Exeter book Riddles. We've got Exeter Riddle 47, the very famous book moth riddle. But what's interesting about this is where Riddle 48 is thought to begin, there's no indication in the manuscript that there has been a change, that a new riddle is starting. So we have editorially decided, that this must be a different riddle. And that's how we've edited it. We give it a different number and all that sort of stuff. But as it survives on the page, it's not a different riddle. And it's fascinating to think about the interpretive possibilities get opened up when you begin to edit these two riddles together as one. And indeed, there have been some arguments in the past which kind of look at that. But again, editorially, we have the ability now to kind of conflate and bring those things together. Next example is kind of my most favorite one, because as we've slowly worked our way through these texts, making arguments for do we need to amend, do we need to change, we occasionally have discovered cases where a reasonable case could be made for a hitherto undiscovered or unrecognized Old English word. So we've had a series of these, a bunch of them kind of come off of this idea of the potential of these fourth compounds. And so here we have this kind of example of Fyrnjeritu. Let's get it opened up in here so we can see it on the page. There we have it. That often gets amended to fourth Fyrnjeritu on a presumption of some kind of metathetic confusion there, because we already have an example of Fyrnjeritu elsewhere. But here's the thing. Once you begin to dig into it, you've got all sorts of fourth compounds all over the place. And an easy argument could be made that fourth Jeritu fits within this constellation of other fourth compounds, right? And so even if it's a kind of mistake from the exemplar, the scribe could A, be innovating, or B, simply be working off of a previously known or imagined valid word that produces something that is fully functional within the thing. And indeed, we have 3 now examples, as we've worked here, of other potential fourth compounds that traditionally have not been recognized, but could be seen as operative and perhaps valid and deserving of their own place in the Dictionary of Old English and elsewhere. Last 2 examples, I think. Yeah, so we also have kind of moments of scribal intervention and correction, which are perhaps, shall we say, less canonical, but still we might want to keep. This is a great example from Guthlac A, where you've got something that was written here that then gets corrected. There's a letter that's erased here, and you're left with the word inthrinketh, which doesn't really have a kind of clear meaning, and so it often gets reproduced as sort of a bit of a crux. It's thought that maybe inthrinketh was first written, and then that gets erased and fixed. But what's interesting about this is there's no kind of good argument for how this would work as intrinsic. Intrinsic, as Steve Getz points out in my exchanges with him, should be a transitive verb. Here it's got to be intransitive. We don't have any examples of that. So like, what's going on here? And, I kind of think that, what happened is the scribe kind of messed up, was thinking one word, was like writing another, and then was like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to leave it as intrinsic. It's close enough. It kind of works. You'll get it, right? There are arguments that maybe this is supposed to be a version of intrinsic or something like that. But, the scribe had this moment where he was just like, okay, that's close enough. And so we also want to preserve those moments. And I'm going to close off with my favorite fun example that I found of other things you discover when you edit deeply like this. So in Psalm 99, I had to get a psalm in there because there's so damn many of them and we've been editing them for so long. In Psalm 99, you've got this weird little comma here in the middle of Ayala. Let's get the other thing up here. You got this weird little comma in the letter of Ayala. And, when my contributing editor, I always tell them, if you see anything weird, let me know, because we got to talk about it. And they were like, hey, this is really weird. What's this comma doing here? What's this little apostrophe doing here? And we dug into it. And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because that's kind of the symbol for eus, the Latin eus. So what would that be doing there? Well, if you go across to the other side of the Latin, you see that this psalm is full of eos. There's like 4 of them, in the same verse. Eos, 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 eos. And I really believe that this scribe was just making this tiny little joke here to be like, look at what? Eyal. Look at all the eoses in this text. And so I just wanted to leave you with that one last little example of just kind of really, really just great stuff that has been elided from the modern editorial record, that this kind of comprehensive systemic review might recover for us and for future generations of scholars. Thank you so much for bearing with all of my technological and also environmental concerns as I was talking.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Martin, for this great resource. And I speak for everyone that we have been wowed